One. Hello, everyone. This is Shane Gibson with Digital Rebar and Rack-In. Welcome to another edition of Digital Rebar Provision Meetup. Today, we've got a very fun day scheduled for all of us. We've got our first ever live guests in the house sitting in my living room here. So joining me today, I have Chris Trees, and I'm told Mike goes by Trink. So Mike and we will refer to as Trink, and Chris, also known as C-Trees or Cat, online with us. Welcome, guys. Thank you very much for showing up.
Thanks for having us.
And in our Austin office, as ever, we've got Greg and Victor, who will be showing us some really exciting things. Today we have some very cool changes coming in Digital Rebar Provision with our workflow process and our capabilities. Specifically, we've completely re-engineered the workflow process from our old change stage map, JSON sort of pain in the behind the right solution that did wonderful things for us, but we've taken the learnings and the experience from that and promoted our workflows to first-class citizen status, and they get their own top-level resource and some cool stuff. Today we're going to have Victor and Greg talk to us. Victor wrote a large portion of the workflows. So Victor, if you're ready to go, I was going to turn the floor over to you and let you start talking about workflows. Tell us about what problems we wanted to solve with the old workflow change stage map and our approach to the new workflows process. And then once Victor's done, Greg and Victor collectively, I'm not sure who, one of the two guys there is going to demo our brand spanking new workflows. Victor.
All right. So as most of y'all are no doubt familiar, we already have a process in Digital Rebar Provision for managing machines as they go through their life cycle. And that is, we call it workflow. That's what it shows up on as. That's what it shows up as in UX. But what you're really doing whenever you're messing with workflows in the current system is you are messing with a parameter called change stage map. And it was a good first step at figuring out what a workflow pattern should be, but it has a few drawbacks. Probably the first and biggest one is that due to the way that it is structured as just a set of key value pairs, that you can only ever go through any given stage once during a workflow when you're going through change stage map. That's because you can't have two entries in the map that begin with the same stage that point to different target stages and actions. The second thing that's been an issue with the change stage map and how it works is that the target has two parameters, which is the stage you're going to go to and the action you want to take to get there. And those actions are, it turns out, very easy to get wrong. It was a pretty common error for people to stop processing jobs when they should be waiting to other jobs come along, to wait in the OS install environment, which will cause the OS install to hang, or to reboot when you didn't really want to reboot, and vice versa. So I went ahead and took those lessons learned and created a new top-level object called a workflow. And the object itself is just a name, a description, and a list of stages that you want to go through. The machine now has a workflow field that lives alongside stages, or the stage and the boot end fields. And whenever you set a workflow, it'll automatically expand out all the tasks in the stages that are part of the workflow to the machine task list, so you can see everything that's going to happen to the machine. There was a lot of back-end work that was necessary to make it operate correctly. Probably the biggest change is that the machine agent, which is the client that lives on the system and runs tasks, is a lot smarter on what it can is a lot smarter about knowing when it should reboot and when it should stop and when it should wait for tasks. In most cases, even if you want to continue using the old change stage map method for managing machine workflows, you can omit the actions and the machine agent will do the right thing for the environment that it's in and for what you want to do next. So that's the background. Do you have any questions so far?
Yeah, so some of the problems that we saw with the old workflow is if you had multiple workflow defined in a profile, you could get interesting behavior where well, first of all, you couldn't define the same stage twice. So you couldn't create a workflow, 3 workflows that you attach with a profile and be able to define a single stage twice. You have to do something goofy like clone the stage, give it a different name so it was a different stage name to be able to do that. Presumably, it sounds like that issue is solved as well.
Yes, and it's solved just by the workflow being a list of stages with nothing extra added, and the runner being more intelligent about knowing how it should transition from stage to stage for the environment that the machine is in.
And so, are you still able to apply multiple workflows in a given definition and then be able to transition a machine?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that's mentally different with regard to what we've defined and where we were. With the change stage map, what was really going on is we just had these, if I'm in stage A, go to stage B kind of directives. And we created this concept that we called workflow, which is you kind of start in this point and you end at this point, and the map is just a mishmash of what you're going through. The problem is we called those workflows, but there was no delineation within the map of those different workflows. So when you say, could you go through a set of workflows? Well, you were really just bouncing through the map. And in this case, we now have workflows as separate items. So you can actually have a machine in a workflow, and you know what workflows it's in. You can go through those sets, and then you can issue an update to the machine to change its workflow, which would rebuild its task. And you get a much more directed path kind of flow through the process. And you get the higher order concept of workflow. So in some regards, in the previous model with change stage map, you kind of defined your virtual workflows all together at once. In this model, you can create a workflow, it stands on its own, and you can create multiples of those independent of the machine state, maps, all of that, profiles and stuff. And then you can move the machine through the process. Now, of course, you can always change the workflow from a task like you could before. You can automate all that stuff as update calls to the machine's the object. So all of that stuff is still there, and you can still change the tasks and the flows on the fly like you were before. It's just these objects are now better defined so that when you say, I'm in a workflow, you can actually go see what that directly means versus trying to trace it through this map of state.
Okay. So one of the other issues was if you applied multiple profiles that defined change stage maps in the old system, and you happen to have a stage defined in both profiles, you get really interesting behavior where you get like the first half of the workflow would happen in this first stage, change stage map, and then it would jump to the next half of the change stage map in the other profile defined reference. And so presumably now that everything's sort of a more logical, clean, structured list, we're not going to see any of those odd jumps between profile change stage map instances.
That's correct. One of the things about the implementation that I took care to do was to make sure that all the old change stage maps still work the way you expect it to. And when you stop using change stage map is you just give a machine a workflow, and at that point it will ignore change stage map and walk through the steps that the workflow says it should walk through.
Excellent. So that was sort of my next question, is what happens to change stage maps. So it sounds like with anyone with existing change stage map, as long as they don't define a workflow, the old system will still process those change stage maps in the same manner that we're used to.
Right. As long as they don't set a workflow on a machine, then the machine will still honor whatever change stage maps you've got set up in its profiles.
Perfect. So the upgrade path is pretty easy. It's whenever somebody's ready to convert their existing change stage map to the new workflows. It's a matter of rewriting it in the workflows and then apply that workflow's top level resource to the machines, either directly or through a profile.
Mm-hmm. And depending on how complex it is, that's something that there may even be an automated path towards rewriting things in the change stage maps into workflow objects directly.
Excellent. And are we planning on keeping that change stage map process around forever? Or are we going to deprecate that and pull that out at some point? Or
well, it's I kind of have it deprecated now in the sense that going forward, I'd recommend using the workflow stuff, but I don't have any plans on removing it. But I know that people have built up workflows in change stage using the change stage map mechanism, and I don't want to, I don't want to set a deadline for getting rid of that right now. Both code paths are pretty easy to maintain, and they both have unit testing to make sure that we don't break it in the future.
I mean, technically, our change stage version 1 is still in the code.
right.
Good luck on figuring out what we actually did at that point, because I don't think we even documented that.
We didn't even have it that well defined.
But that's still even there too, right?
Yep.
That's in regards, we've created feature flags, or Victor's created feature flags for these items, so that the system can interrogate what version's available and what can be used.
Right. And so I know that we have the API and the CLI pieces in place for managing the workflows. What's the status of the UX right now in terms of being able to create, render, and operate with the workflows?
So there's a lot of little tweaks all over, and they're in our testing and our really bleeding edge trees. I haven't moved them to tip yet, or obviously stable for the UX. The first phase of things that are working are things like on the machine, you can view the workflow, you can change the workflow. In bulk actions, you now have a workflow setter capability. Those are available. We can visualize some of the workflows, and but right now you can't create them through the UI. Okay. We're hoping to have that in the next couple of days.
Yeah. So hopefully, definitely by the next meetup, we'll have a lot more progress on the UX side of things.
That's right. Yeah, but derp CLI is already fully functional for workflows.
That's right.
And as Victor had alluded to, we've got a bunch more documentation on the new workflow system. So we'll be able to point people at the new workflows documentation to allow them to pick up and move forward with workflows versus the change stage map.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yep. And that's all in the Arch documentation, in the helpfully named workflow document.
Excellent.
You want to show?
Need help on the Wi-Fi. Dive back into.
Take over sharing.
You guys hear Victor?
No, say that again.
I need to take over sharing the screen. So
All right.
Stop sharing.
All yours.
There we go. Then where's the share screen? All right. So, can y'all hear me all right like this? Or is it a little too echoey?
Yeah, make your browser bigger, please.
All right. There we've got a shiny, happy local machine. It's just hanging out. It's hanging out. It has CentOS 7 installed on it. And so, pretty boring right now. So hopefully I'm going to place right. All right, I am running directly UX. So I've created a workflow called My Hacky Workflow. Its purpose in life is to walk through, going through, discovering the hardware, flashing any BIOS flashing before it really needs to be flashed, doing BIOS configuration, wiping out the disks, installing CentOS, and running out of space. You can't actually see all the tasks because of RUI. There's actually a couple more things at the end of this runner service. You can't see. But if I do the next time over here.
There we go. Fisher Price fonts.
Yes.
Perfect. Rob's always yelling at me for having my fonts too small. It looks great on my screen. All right, so there's our new first-class citizen workflows as resource in the CLI.
You can see that my Hacky workflow is built out of Discover Flash, BIOS configure, RAID example, prep install, CentOS install, install the runner, and then switch to. And that will walk through an entire OS install sequence.
So, Victor, a quick thing that jumps out right away is the old way we used to define an action after success, reboot, stop, action. And those are now all handled completely in tasks?
Yep.
Well, or implied. So, for example, the tasks can issue return codes that will cause the system to reboot or stop and those kind of things. Those are still available, and they've been available.
And they're not going to change because, like Flash, for instance, needs to be able to tell the runner to just stop and reboot because I just flashed the BIOS and we need to reboot to finish the install process.
And so implied, presumably bootm, so does that have an implied reboot? Actually, I think there's a specific directive in there. It says reboot.
There are no specific well, there is a specific directive on stages, and it's deprecated. Don't use it anymore. But the task runner itself is smart enough to know that a system should be rebooted whenever the boot environment changes. And it's also smart enough to know that if you are in an OS install bootenv, that it should stop processing tasks whenever it runs out of things to do, as opposed to waiting for more tasks to appear on the machine.
So how do we string together? So the old way, I would string multiple stages together instead of rebooting in a bootenv process. I would initiate a reboot explicitly as part of the stage, 3 or 4 stages down the road, because I didn't want the bootenv to reboot until multiple subsequent stages finish.
You no longer have to do that.
Yeah, so at that point, what you would do as part of your stage construction, you would make sure that either your stage had no bootenv set, which means execute in the current bootenv. And so, for example, in the workflow Victor brought up, the system will continue installing tasks and doing all the things in the CentOS install environment. When it gets to complete actually changes the bootenv to local.
Okay.
As part of that consequence, it says, I have changed bootenv. And the runner inside of the install boot environment goes, wait, I'm in an install boot environment, and you want me to, you change bootenv, oh, I should just exit and let the install process finish. Yep.
Got it.
So the idea is that stages, if you really mean them to be usable in all kind of environment, all 3 of our standard environments, of Sledgehammer install boot environments and post-install boot environments, then don't set their boot environment unless it's required, right?
Yeah, like runner service, for instance, it doesn't have a bootenv specified. It'll run in any of Sledgehammer, the OS install environment, or in a final install environment.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm ready to see more.
All right. So now for the demo. And let me type in UX and type that machine. See what's going on. I put it in my terminal because I don't want to anger the demo gods by doing something I didn't do earlier.
So what are you going to demo? Just walking the machine through this fancy my test workflow.
Yeah.
Yep.
My hacky workflow, right?
Yeah, my hacky.
So there we've got our nice little cleaning view. It's just sitting there chilling out. And I'm going to go ahead and change the workflow from nothing, what it currently is, workflow empty, to my happy workflow. And it just rebooted. And now, if you look at the task list, got a whole bunch of stuff here. So,
Big long list, yep.
yeah, so what happened there is whenever we changed the workflow, the DR provision was smart enough to know how to expand all the stages that were in that workflow into their individual components. So the discover stage expanded into stage discover, and it knows it needs to go to the sledgehammer boot environment, so it rebooted the sledgehammer. And then it'll go through to go high at stage access, then it'll walk through all the steps that are required for flash, and then BIOS configuration, and then RAID configuration, which will fail because I'm on a VM and you can't do any of that stuff on a VM. So I'll just skip them. And you can see it going through here and loading up the RAID tools, erasing the disks, and it's rooted with the OS install file.
The little triangle in the UI represents where it is in the process.
Yep.
That's where it's currently playing.
That's right. This took care of another problem that we kind of didn't talk about too much. In general, stages themselves knew how to handle recovery rebooting in the middle of processes. But because we could chain them together, it created a situation where we couldn't recover states. So for example, if you were in Sledgehammer and you went through a discovery process that was 4 stages deep, for example, we often show demos with Terraform Ready, where we would go through Discover and then Packet Discover and then end up in Terraform Ready. Packet Discover, put your SSH keys in place. But if you rebooted the node after it was sitting there in Terraform Ready, it would go back to Terraform Ready. Well, in transient boot environments, that's not good, because then your newly rebooted system, while sitting in Terraform Ready, can't be accessed through SSH. It never went through that stage. So one of the niceties of this new setup is if I have a workflow defined that contains those 3 stages, if it reboots, it knows the full set of stages that need to be rerun to get back to the state that it was in.
Nice. Excellent.
So that way it can unwind it and go back. So for example, if you look at the screen for Victor's stage list, it knows now, because it injects the transition points into the task list, and knows how to walk back to the correct position to start where the last transition occurred in a boot end, which represents where a reboot might have occurred, right? So that way it knows what to rebuild and when. And not to completely start over. So for example, at this point, it knows not to go back to stage discover, but to start at the CentOS install boot end.
Right. But it'll restart that stage and task at that point.
Yeah, so at this point, we can have
Yeah, at this point, when the it's already finished installing packages and it's going through doing post-install stuff. But when the runner kicks back up, when it gets to running the post-install scripts, it will notice that the system rebooted and it needs to figure out where it needs to reset its task list. And it will figure out that there's nothing to reset to because there's no previous tasks that ran in the CentOS 7 install stage. So it'll stay right where it's at and roll forward.
Right.
So one of the consequences of this change, and we get this from various people we talk to, even our humble Shane started from this point at one point, and that everybody seems to think we have this monstrous task list that we're maintaining, or we were maintaining, and rolling forward on and rolling back through. Well, now we do. And so the point is, with a workflow, when you set the workflow, the task list actually becomes your real task queue. So usually we see people asking and saying, hey, what's the task queue? You pop things on and off this queue and do this stuff. And we're like, well, not really. Well, now we do. So it actually represents the full work you've asked the system to do going forward.
Right.
With the change stage map, it was kind of implicitly there, and you had to unwind it to figure out. The point is, it really is a queue. It's really going to try and drive that to completion, and when it's done, it's going to stop.
And there it goes.
And so,
one of the things that we used to do is we would render the task and templates basically just in time when they're requested by a given task or stage or call. Presumably that still happens. So in the past, I've been able to inject changes into a task, load a new task while my process is occurring, and my stage and tasks have already been set, but I've already injected down the line of change to the task from the point that the workflow process started.
That's still true. The boundaries are a little more defined since we can change stages. The rule is that you can't add tasks past the next stage transition.
Right, but the rendering of the tasks and the templates is still just in time.
That's still all just in time. That's still on demand.
So we can't change the stage, the tasks in the task list once the workflow's started completely, or just inject new changes. Can we add tasks to the end of an existing workflow?
No, you can add tasks to a workflow at any point up to the next stage change.
Up to the next stage change, okay. So you can affect future stage changes, but the current stage is pretty much kind of locked.
No, you can affect the current stage.
the current stage too. So in some regards, comes back to, don't think of it as stages, think of it as tasks. It really is a task queue, but it's got these built-in boundaries of where you define stages.
Okay.
For example, in the BIOS and RAID code sets, they will run the discovery, or I think it's called BIOS install tools, for example. Mm-hmm. And part of that does hey, let me inventory the system. Can I do anything on the system? Oh, I can't. It moves and finishes. But if it can, it then injects tasks at that point, saying, add these additional things to figure out more information to see if I should update, all of that stuff. RAID also works that way, where it says, okay, do I have any RAID controllers that I know about? Oh, I do. Let me add my enumerate and discover and configure kind of tasks after the current point. But the injection gets added to the task queue before the next stage change.
Okay.
So basically,
yeah, that one's
learning as they go about the system.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly what's happening, right? That way you can inject tasks into your workflow based upon things you discover.
Now you can slap AI on it.
Yeah, that's next.
Add some blockchain next also.
Hey.
Blockchain and AI, all at the same time. Smart blockchain.
And PWA too, by the way. And new icons.
Hey,
we have an icon stage.
Oh, by the way, the task flow is starting to look like, the old one, at least, in my brain.
Yeah, exactly. Like the old deployment view.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. It
at least this, follows it like, in school. I like it. I know that you don't like it all that much. I mean, it's not as important, but
actually, in some regards, it gives you better feedback in some regards, so you can watch it versus having to guess which stage.
Yeah. The problem with that list in DR version 2 is it never was actually a list. It was a big old gnarled graph that we sliced list-like views out of. That it wasn't really a list or operating at all like a list in the back end.
So in its pub sub, that's the callback stuff or the push stuff, or I can't remember.
For which?
Well, you're getting that information pushed to you by Sledgehammer, right? Is it the other way around? It's being pulled off with Sledgehammer.
The way it currently works is the agent is a process that runs on the box, And its entire job is to basically set up some initial stuff and listen for events. And
Okay.
take action in response to the events that it gets. And if it, if it finds out that the machine is runnable and available, it'll say, "Give me a job."
Yeah, and that mechanism is a pull model.
Events back based off of the results of the run and take action on those, and so on and so forth until it's finished. The new documentation actually goes into it in a fairly decent amount of detail.
And so, yeah, Shane's right. It effectively operates as a pull model from the node, and then like the UI is getting updated by listening to that same event stream and updating the views based upon that.
Excellent. Any more on workflow? Victor, do you have any more to show us there? Or?
No, that's pretty much it. The only other
part is the finished results of the CentOS install.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We just see the green check mark was added, so.
Yeah, it's there.
CentOS is installed.
And so our sledgehammer image emits a message in the Etsy issue which says sledgehammer, so we know that this is presumably not sledgehammer and is actually a CentOS 7 install.
Missing the big hammer.
And no big hammer, yep. And
yeah, actually, Victor, can you select bulk actions in UI view?
No, because I'm not logged into the portal.
Oh, never mind. Yeah, never mind.
Our own engineers trying to be incognito.
That's right.
I love it. I see that we also have Gary Berger who just joined us. Gary, I believe you're from Dell. Welcome.
And just missed our super awesome demo. So
just missed the super awesome demo. Yeah, maybe Gary's a little shy. Oh, he's shy. He just muted himself. He doesn't want to talk. That's okay.
Sorry, I was a little bit late.
No worries. Well, we do have it recorded, Gary, so you'll be able to go back to the beginning and watch the workflow demo and discussion. So.
Okay, great.
Awesome. And we're going to follow up workflow with UX enhancements and changes. Greg, I assume you're going to take away.
No, sorry. When I gave you that item, I meant it to be with the workflow stuff. We haven't really changed too much in the UX.
I didn't think so. So.
Yeah, I mean, from what Victor's showing, right, many of you probably have seen the new bars at the top, right?
Oh, we have the new switches and LDP info.
Yeah, yeah.
It's either my hacking workflow, and if I add LDP on the box, you might go see LDP stuff if I have the right page.
Yeah. So there's some things coming content-wise. Rob put together a LLDP map query set of stages so that you can run that and it'll set parameters on the machine. And then the UX will give you a view to kind of see those. I don't think I have that set up right now. Do I? I do not. So that'll show up here in a bit. And the workflow stuff will get better, I promise.
Yeah, we have a fair bit of work to do on the UX side on the workflow.
Yeah, there might even be some drag and drop at some point.
No secrets, don't give away secrets.
Yeah, those two things are probably the
What you're doing.
more recent things to keep an eye out for. And like I said, to use the switches view, you'll need to pull in a part of the task library, I believe is where he put it, but I'm not sure. Actually,
Yeah, we'll probably in 2 weeks we'll have Rob demo the LLDP switches view, and we'll see if we can get a physical switch and some machines attached to it to show a little more interesting stuff with it.
Yeah, I mean, and since we're kind of at things that are showing up in the community and tip-wise, there's a couple of, one new plugin I think you might be able to see, which manages KVM systems. Manages Victor's KVM system.
And it may possibly manage yours. Your results may vary.
And so
it's very focused on my test workflow. And if you ever open it up for public consumption, there'll probably be some rapid refactoring.
Yeah, so there's some, we'd like to hear interest of that for just raw KVM on your local system.
Yeah, this really is KVM, no live vert, no distributed anything. It's literally just, here's some running KVM instances, and if you ever kill DR provision, they're going to go away.
Yeah. And then if you were to use the Packet or VirtualBox plugin, TIP has some additional capabilities which are cool and can be dangerous if you're not thinking about it.
Okay, so how are they cool? Let's define what's cool.
Okay, so what's cool is if you're familiar or new of our DRPv2 stuff, we gave you the ability to create what were called providers that let you create machines in the virtual environments. So you could say, create the machine, and then it would do it. Well, the plugins now have the ability to watch for a machine being created with the parameter. And if the parameter matches the plugin name, the plugin will then try to instantiate that item inside of its virtual space. So if it's VirtualBox, for example, you can say like, create for my VirtualBox plugin name, and you create the machine, and then it'll go off and create a VirtualBox instance and have it boot off of VBox Net 0 and go through and create stages or run through stages and other stuff that you can set. But because you're actually creating the DRP machine, you can do things like, well, now set a workflow, set memory, disk size, stuff like that as parameters, and then that'll show up. Same thing applies for Packet. You can ask it to say which region or facility, what they call it, their facility, and then the machine type, and you can even give it the project ID you want to create the machine in, and it will create that machine, and then tell that machine to boot from the DRP that you instantiated it from.
So it's setting the user data fields and the always PXE flags appropriately.
That's right.
Right. And then, so presumably the scary side of things is delete.
That's right. So if you delete the machine in DRP, it will go and delete the machine in those virtual spaces. Now,
what happens if you delete a machine, say in Packet through the Packet API portal? What happens to the machine DRP?
Right now, we don't watch events from Packet, though I've been looking into that and may add that. If you were to reconfigure the plugin, it will go reevaluate the system and update the machines that it created on behalf of Packet and vice versa to reflect what's actually in. I think I can show that if you want. Yeah. Here, let me have this share for a second.
You got to arm wrestle with Victor there locally, my friend.
Yeah, we just had our fight. It's okay. Maybe. So, for example, if you see, all right. Oh wait, wrong one.
You got a bunch of my nodes. You got a bunch of Rob's nodes.
So this, for example, is our Packet environment that we can see. And so and I'm actually running 2 sets or 3 plugins. Don't look at that top one, it's a work in progress. But like I have VirtualBox locally and Packet remotely. And so because we have the same corporate Packet space and each have, while we have different API keys to do work, when I started the plugin, it enumerated and found all of the Packet machines, which are all of these guys here, out in our space, right? And so, and then one of my VirtualBox nodes here. It built that, and if I go look, I can go see the facility, the machine. Currently I have a bug, project ID is supposed to be filled in, and then the UUID. Because of the tooling with the plugins, plugins pick up actions now, as well as machines like you had before. So you can get create, start, stop, VM kind of things from those providers as well. So the objects have item actions now too, and Victor's KVM version has that as well. You pick up a whole bunch of new parameters that let you manipulate information. So, for example, as I have like everything in the Sun installed, so like VirtualBox, you can specify the CPUs, the disk size, the memory size. For some reason, I gave you VRAM size. I have no idea why, but you can set those 4 parameters on the machine when you create them, and then VirtualBox will create those items. That makes sense? And then the same thing for Packet, right? Packet has facility, plan, project ID. We'll set those, and then as part of the create process, we'll fill in the discovered ones for you. So you don't even really have to run Packet. Part of Packet discovery isn't needed anymore. But.
So it sounds like some of these feature sets subsume some of the things in Terraform.
They can be, yeah. So what's interesting is you can actually use them in parallel with Terraform, or they can replace parts of Terraform. But yeah, you kind of can mix and match better now, as you see fit. So anyway, that's just realizing that's in tip, and it's getting more robust as we speak. So.
Yeah, so please, people, if you come back to this video stream and you're looking for some fun project test tip for us, let us know what you find.
That's right. And I know, let's see. Where was I? All right, I can stop here. I know, I think, Gary, you're the one that posted the video in our community, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you were using the InfraSim to kind of work through a process. And so there's in some regards, the same plugin models could work for that too, which is an interesting thing. Potentially.
Yeah, so what Greg's referring to is Gary Berger is First Class Funk and Pound Community for Digital Rebar Provision channel on Slack. And he's using InfraSim, which is an infrastructure simulation tool to help simulate machines and networks. And so he's done some really interesting work wiring DRP together with InfraSim to simulate machine boots and builds and stuff. And he put together a video he posted, what, three or 4 days ago, Gary, end of last week, I think?
Yeah, and I posted the GitHub site this morning.
Excellent. Very cool. We're interested in definitely digging into a little more of the InfraSim stuff with you and find out what you're doing with it. And possibly, I have some interest in using it as well. So
Great.
Awesome. Anything more, Victor, Greg, on workflow and UX changes and forward-looking things?
No, we've babbled probably enough.
Okay. At this point, we'll turn it over to community and community questions, feedback, comments, jeers, hisses, boos, or throw money. Any of those things. What do you have to say? Anyone have any thoughts or questions from community? Gary, Drink, Chris.
No, I'm a non-talker, you know that.
Yeah, I know. Chris is always chatting with me, and I always forget to open my chat window, so he's chatting to either open space or everyone else but me. All right. Well, that's it for version 14 of Digital Rebar Provision Meetup. Thank you very much for everybody for attending. Greg and Victor, thank you very much for putting together the demo and the information on workflows. It's very exciting stuff. Looking forward to moving workflow into a first-class citizen's position and starting to work with it going forward. We'll be back again in 2 weeks, whatever 2 weeks equals from today, the 27th. It's something like April 10th, I think. So I look forward to seeing you all on April 10th. Thank you very much. And I got to find the stop recording button. That'll do it.